I-45 male was married to my wife, 39 female for just 6 years when we dated. She fell hard for me. I was in still am a pilot through my company. I get flight privileges and free tickets to anywhere. My wife also had a premium account since she flew with me on several occasions. Within the time we were dating and married, we went to 8 different countries as an extravagant birthday present to one of her friends. My wife hosted a girls-only trip to Paris. She was living the life without having to work at all. I think this life of luxury, thanks to me, made it easier for her to bash her ex-husband all the time and continually express how glad she was to be rid of him. He was actually the one that filed for divorce against her. But that's just one of the things my wife lied to me about. I noticed that my wife was still connected to her ex via social media. I figured she wanted him to see her updates about how great our life was together. I didn't really care. That was the only thing I noticed before day. Several of my flights were cancelled because 3 of the airline's planes needed inspection before their next flight. I decided not to tell my wife. I was coming home early to see what she was doing with her day since she didn't have a job. I was surprised to find 2 cars in her driveway. When I entered the home, I didn't hear anything. I went upstairs and that's when I heard noises. I felt something overtake me knowing my wife was in our bedroom with another person. The door was locked. So I grabbed a hammer from the hallway closet. I bashed around the doorknob as my wife screamed until the door swung open. They were bug-eyed in bed, completely uncomfortable and scared for their lives. She was in our bed with the ex-husband. She so boldly bashed. I screamed names at her and at God. I told her she was a liar and I told him he was exactly the piece of crap. My wife said he was. He got dressed quickly and left. I wish I knew what he was thinking. Entering my home to sleep with his ex. He must have been a stupid idiot and he's lucky, I'm not a fighter. My wife then tried to touch my shoulder while holding the she around her and asked me not to do anything rash. I pulled away and said I was kicking her out the house. I told her I wouldn't consider repairing this relationship. Even if she was the last girl on earth. She was sobbing but did her best to act like she could handle me, dumping her. She started packing her bags as if she could recover from this in another room. I called her mother and told her everything in turn. She told her father and the rest of her family. My wife left in her car without knowing that everyone knew what she'd done. She went to AP's house where she checked her phone for any messages for me. She found none, but she did find a ton of messages from her family. They were scolding her for cheating on me. The greatest thing to ever happen in her life. They called me an honorable provider and said she was a moron for what she did. It was clear that they felt she should have left her ex in the past and they wouldn't be supportive of her after this. She left a voicemail for me saying I ruined her life by refusing to forgive her. She decided to leave the country with AP, so with their bags packed, they went to the airport at the ticket counter. My wife tried to swipe the platinum flight card I provided for her, but it failed to go through since I had it cancelled just 30 minutes earlier. She then immediately called me telling me that her card was not working anymore and that AP was no longer interested in flying with her. I guess he had a sudden change of heart about their spontaneous rekindling without any other options. My wife left the airport security office alone in her car, packed full of luggage for her parents' house. She begged either of them to let her move back in, but they only stared at her with disappointment and turned her away. They couldn't resist letting her move back in after she was homeless for a few nights. Her mother couldn't believe her daughter did this after bashing her ex so much. So she called me. I told her everything that happened, how I felt and how my ex thought I was wrong for failing to forgive her with that. Her mother told me she wanted to kick her out and asked how I felt about the idea. I told her to do it because my wife foolishly thought she could start a new life with AP after telling me what a terrible person he was after vowing her commitment and love to me. She shouldn't get handouts from anyone. Look at what my spoiling did to her. Her head blew up with entitlement without any respect towards me. even though I was the one that allowed her to think this way. Her mother was convinced and kicked her out that same night. It's been 2 years and my ex has since found herself and her daughter a low-income apartment and a drug habit. Your wife is unbelievable. After you provided a life of luxury for your wife, she allowed her ex back into her life. I can't believe she had the nerve to bring him into your marital bed. It must have been her ego and entitlement blown through the roof. How could she not see that you were the only reason she had the things she did? It's a relief that AP came to his senses right there in the airport. No one deserves to have that unstable and untrustworthy woman in their life. She would only take advantage of them while looking out solely for herself. That's probably why her ex divorced her in the first place. Even though you married her, you still dodged a bullet and made excellent decisions in this time of crisis. It's lucky you discovered the truth. Now, never had children with her and cancelled her airline privileges so she couldn't escape her consequences and family shaming. I wish you the best of luck in life. Thank you for sharing your story. Now, let's get into our second story for today. I, 27 male, trusted my wife, 27 female, with all my heart. We were high school sweethearts that married with our parents' approval. She never lied and proved herself trustworthy to me and my family. On many occasions, I grew up with my stepfather. So I trusted his judgment as well as my mother's. That's what makes my story so painful. Our 7th wedding anniversary passed while I was overseas, serving the country as a U.S. soldier. I had to spend much of my time away from home, but my wife knew of my military aspirations before we got married. She stayed at home, making about $100 a month with her knitting projects. She was supportive of me, took excellent care of our home and always made amazing reunion love with me when I returned home. However, this time when I arrived home, after a 10-month deployment, something was terribly wrong. I hadn't heard from my mother, stepfather or wife for a few months. Actually, I did hear from my mother, but it was always kept short and she was very vague when it came to how my stepfather or wife were. She only said she didn't know why my wife wouldn't talk to me but told me that whatever it was I could get through it. That was the closest I got to any warning about what was going on. My wife looked sick and nervous when I walked through our front door and she was wearing a huge t-shirt. I immediately went to hug her and felt her try to resist before I pulled her against me. I could feel the hard bump in her stomach pressing against me within a fraction of a second. I knew she was pregnant and I knew I wasn't the father. I yanked her shirt up to reveal her mid-sized baby hump and a scream came out of my mouth. She immediately broke down crying after hearing my scream and admitted that my stepfather forced himself on her. Hearing this was too much for me to process. As I got into the car, I heard her begging me not to tell anyone about it. That was an extremely odd request. After telling me he forced her to become pregnant, I practically broke into my parents' house to find my mom sitting knowingly in the living room with her hands folded on her lap. She stood up and gave me a long hug where I just cried. She told me she knew about the baby already and filed for divorce against my stepfather. I asked her if their affair was consensual and she was certain it was. She found messages between them on AP's phone. I just took the day with my mother to grieve over this life-changing mistake. Each of our spouses made my stepfather was the worst human being on earth. He betrayed me, the boy he raised as his own child, the boy he taught how to be a man by knocking out my wife while I fought as a soldier. Throughout the time I stayed with my mother and processed everything. My soon-to-be ex-wife continued texting and calling me, begging me to forgive her and help her pay for an abortion. She couldn't afford to live without me, which meant her fate was completely in my hands. I told her, even if she got an abortion, this wouldn't be something I could just forgive and forget. She begged me to at least get her an abortion, even if I didn't want to stay with her. I told her to ask my stepfather for the money, or better yet earn the money for an abortion by knitting her butt off as the fetus grows. I told her family about her predicament, but they already knew and already told her they would have nothing to do with her or the child. She wouldn't have to face these consequences alone. since she proved herself to be a self-centered harlot had just laughed without any help from anyone, and the court order for her to vacate the house. She was losing her mind. She had no skills besides her knitting and knew finding a steady job would be impossible for her, especially without a home address. Meanwhile, the baby keeps growing. She left voicemails and texts for me saying she couldn't bear the thought of losing me. Her husband, her strong, brave pro-driver. She continued blowing up my phone until I had no choice but to block her across all platforms. That was the lard. I heard of her. My stepfather has not spoken to me since all this happened. He doesn't talk to any of our family even though he was a part of it for 25 years. It really is like he dropped off the face of the earth and proved that he was the terrible person he proved himself to be. He doesn't care about me or his unborn child, which is what bothers me the most. All I know is that after this experience, I vowed to be the best father I can to any children that enter my life. I already tried being the best husband I could be. But it didn't matter when I was apart from my wife. I'm done with my military service now and started dating a new woman. You did everything you could as a husband. And it seemed like it was enough. The problem was your wife's infidelity and impatience for love and attention. She started an affair with one of the only men she had access to in her life, which was your stepfather. I don't know what he was thinking when he took your wife from you, but he probably wasn't thinking very much at all. Just know that this wasn't your fault. You were living your best life, providing financially and emotionally for your wife as best you could, only to be betrayed by her. All she had to do was remain as patient as you were while you fought, and she did whatever she pleased. You deserve better than this. You deserve a woman that can do the same thing you can for your relationship and marriage. She deserves any hardship she faces as much as your stepfather deserves emotional torment until the day he steps up as a father and apologizes to you. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment